What if I told you there was an amazing JRPG online game that was very successful in the East and that never came to the West? Well, honestly, these days you would probably not be that surprised, especially with it being a Japanese title, as they oftentimes in general never make it overseas. Dragon's Dogma and the subsequent expansion Dark Horizon were slow-cooking Japanese ARPGs that eventually launched to the West and saw great success. But Dragon's Dogma would receive another expansion, though taking the name common when going online as a Japanese title, Dragon's Dogma Online, and would launch August 2015. However, unlike the previous two titles that I mentioned, it would not launch to a Western audience. Dragon's Dogma Online would reach success in Japan, having been played by over 1 million players and only being marketed and launched in the Japanese market. However, after merely 4 years, Dragon's Dogma Online, despite having its success, would be shut down by Capcom, as they would explain difficulties in maintaining the title properly. Since most Westerners never got the chance to play Dragon's Dogma Online, it's been a very highly requested title on this series. The Death of a Game series, where we gather clues and bits of evidence using a timeline to diagnose the largest contributing factors for the death of a game or company. With Dragon's Dogma 2 looming on the horizon for a spring launch in 2024, there's always a chance that another expansion could be created, much like DDO, and if not, at the very least, perhaps this will be an interesting video to DD fans and online RPG fans alike. Let's get to the case detectives. The story begins back in 2012, following the launch and success of Dragon's Dogma. While I mentioned the game being successful, it did take an awful lot of time to reach that point compared to most major Capcom successes. Some have postulated that this was due to a lack of advertising. It certainly wasn't due to a lack of talent, with DD's team having some of the best Japanese developers ever, with the likes of Hideaki Itsuno of Devil May Cry, Hiroyuki Kobayashi of RE1 or Resident Evil 1, and a star-studded lineup on the soundtrack team of Tadayoshi Makin, Rei Kondo, Masayoshi Ishii, and Inonzur. Hideaki would create the backbone of the design of Dragon's Dogma, such as the pawn system, a system much like the hero system in Guild Wars 1, where you can select from different heroes with particular abilities and focuses and team up with them to beat the game. These pawns would also roam the world and function like players in a sense, populating the otherwise empty world. You could even voice chat with them and form friendships. Dragon's Dogma was built on casually being a social game because although it didn't have full multiplayer features, the pawn system and the event system allowed you to asynchronously play with others online, which is kind of the trademark Japanese approach these days, I should add. But for the time, Dragon's Dogma was ahead of the curve. Dragon's Dogma, despite being a Japanese title, was actually quite modeled off of successful Western RPGs like Fallout, Fable, and even Oblivion, allowing you to customize your own appearance and character and play the game as you saw fit. Featuring a strong DMC team component, the same control layout as well, and the same engine that DMC4 used, as well as the Lost Planet, the MT framework engine, Dragon's Dogma wasn't just a JRPG, it was a JARPG, allowing you to aim your attacks and dodge the enemies with movement. DD also featured Capcom's largest open world yet, which would lend itself to what this video is about after all. Dragon's Dogma Online would be first teased not long after the launch of the first game. It was a natural fit after all. DD had many aspects that lent itself to social play, but didn't actually offer multiplayer play. While for other markets, like most Westerners watching, you might not see the utility of such a social, mostly offline game, the Japanese market has a much different approach to socialization, as you can see in franchises like Persona, Dragon's Dogma, and even Dark Souls. Asynchronous multiplayer play, as it's often called, is pretty much the norm in Japan in modern times, but before it was, there were even fewer online Japanese titles, especially not counting the 2 Final Fantasy ones. As I discussed in my PSO video, or Phantasy Star Online, that's because the Japanese market has been rather resistant to massive games as a whole, and really online games period, having very little successful Western games make it in their market, and many Japanese titles having success so they didn't even need to go elsewhere. PSO had started the whole craze though, and by 2012 they had just released another sequel in just Japan, another title that wouldn't come to America for a decade by the way. In their own unique way, by taking inspiration from the West, they created their very own style of online RPG with Phantasy Star Online and the subsequent styled games. Now, part of the reason that the Japanese market has very little interest in massive titles or even competitive multiplayer is quite cultural and even government related. But another is simply that they just make money by staying local and don't need to go abroad. This makes local multiplayer and network-based multiplayer far more of a focus as a whole. Capcom with DDO, for example, had to work with their offices in South Korea to figure out the server tech from the mecca of MMOs. With the design already fit for multiplayer play, just needing the whole servers aspect figured out, Dragon's Dogma as a franchise seemed like it was a good fit for going online. Dragon's Dogma Online was looking to take inspiration from titles like PSO or even Kento's Monster Hunter franchise, allowing players to play the game both online and offline through the use of the pawn system. According to Kento Kaneshita, the lead director on Dragon's Dogma Dark Arise and now DDO, while there had been requests for multiplayer functionality from our customers, we gave priority to creating Dark Horizon as a version 1.5 of Dragon's Dogma because we had just released that game worldwide. What was Kento's ultimate goal with DDO? I wanted to offer an ongoing service that leveraged Dragon's Dogma strength with action in a multiplayer online environment while incorporating the fun of an MMO into everything else. My goal was to expand the world of Dragon's Dogma, creating a game that combines the strong point of adventuring with your pawn and the excitement of large groups of players all playing simultaneously together. By putting together the best aspects of MMOs and building and operating the servers ourselves, we could add updates or handle any customer service issues flexibly, which would be a plus for the players. Kento wanted to, as he describes, create an MMORPG that has elements of an MMO, which nearly all of them would, right? This is worth noting because not only does it explain the core design of the game, for example, it not ever eclipsing more than 8 players, it also explains my previous point about the Japanese style of online RPG. The issue would be that unlike PSO and Final Fantasy Online franchises, who focused on building smaller contained cooperative worlds, DDO would take a further leap into the massive part of MMO and bring it into the scale of Dragon's Dogma, which was already Capcom's largest open world game. It goes further than easy money and cultural reasons for Japanese design. Another reason is simply put that they do this style of game the best. In my opinion, Japanese developers are the best at creating the feel of a world in the smallest of online games. Think of things like Animal Crossing. DDO venturing further away from a Japanese style of design, being largely a Western-based RPG, was going to cause some serious problems later on. DDO would end up getting delayed internally after successful testing due to the focus being put on Kento's Dark Horizon expansion for the first game. Dark Horizon would launch in 2013 to much faster success than the original game and help further cement the possibility of DDO coming later on as fans would continue to request multiplayer for the franchise. DDO would be officially announced 2 years later, January 2015, with some of the details revealed then. DDO is described as an online game as you'd expect from the title, with an open world and a lobby that supports up to 100 players. Players can form parties of up to 4 players or pawns and go on quests, and raids support up to 8 players at one time. What was most shocking in the reveal was, according to Capcom UK, Capcom wasn't going to be bringing the title to the West, and they didn't seem like they were going to change their mind either. Well, much like when I cover Korean MMOs, these two markets are mostly focused on, their own markets. It costs money to port a game to another region, and money that's not always recouped or necessarily worth it for Japanese or Korean developers. Korean titles eventually end up in the West. It just takes time. Japan seemed to be unique in not even allowing their titles to even make it to the West, period, and perhaps the simplest answer that I have been told by a source in Japan is just that it's free real estate. AKA, it's easy money, and that stands for far more in Japan than massive possibilities. The fact that Dragon's Dogma Online was a hub-based online RPG might have let some Western fans down, but being more of what Japanese fans were used to, many fans were quite excited for such. Even Western fans were still holding steadfast and watching the news and the movement of the game regardless, as it would enter its closed beta in July of 2015. Dragon's Dogma Online would launch exclusively in Japan August 31st, 2015 as a free-to-play title, and much to Kento's desire, the game was very much as he described. Dragon's Dogma Online with MMO elements. And much like Dragon's Dogma and Dark Horizon was, DDO was successful for the franchise. At least in terms of players, with over 370,000 characters created by the next month of the game's launch, and over 1 million accounts just 10 days after launch. Depending on the business model, many of these players could be monetized. And if not, if the model was done right, they could still make a healthy penny. DDO would have to have a solid business plan to function as a free-to-play title, and make enough money to have Capcom fully buy into it. Because without a box price or a monthly fee, it was going to be difficult to earn money, especially in the Japanese market, which was not like the Korean market, quite used to microtransactions in their online games. In fact, most successful online Japanese games are either buy-to-play or subscription-based. Capcom was promising a TV show and a seasonal new content release, so it didn't seem like they were just satisfied with just impressing at the finish line, or really, for online games, the start of things. It seemed like Capcom was in it for the long haul. Season 2 would release April 28th, 2016, half a year later, which for an online RPG wasn't totally absurd, but certainly a lengthy time to add content or have significant updates. With new zones and threats to take on, players would have their content desires sated for just a little bit longer, but it would start to highlight a problem from the beginning. Capcom, not experienced in multiplayer games at the time, was known for being slow even amongst Japanese developers. There were some serious fears that they would take far too long to add additional content to the game, especially with the rise of Square Enix's Final Fantasy XIV and the continued success of Sega's Phantasy Star Online. Japan had some serious competition, even if the games offered some unique aspects among them. 14 was actually a fairly good comparison for DDO, because 14 was also, during its A Realm Reborn version at least, modeled after in some ways the most popular Western MMO, WoW. Dragon's Dogma, as you remember, was successful in being a Japanese attempt at a Western RPG. The problem being they couldn't just copy WoW's design necessarily, because their game was fundamentally different, even before deciding to take it online. Dragon's Dogma was a massive open-world ARPG, an aspect that WoW doesn't have anymore, or in the case of the latter, it never had, because it's a tab-target game. This meant that Dragon's Dogma was a unique title certainly, but was closer to PSO and a traditional JRPG online title by design. DDO was this unique hybrid title. The problem would be that much of what the larger aspects of the game had were just fairly lacking. Not only did the game lack true massive aspects to it, the world, massive or not, was fairly empty and lifeless. So there was very little sandbox virtual world aspects present, which made the purpose of such a large world kind of pointless. In an interesting way, DDO is a lesson into why you have to commit, ultimately. Final Fantasy XIV, being a tab-target game already, was able to commit to being more like another Western tab-target game, and find its uniqueness and success in that. DDO, on the other hand, was caught between being a Japanese game, marketed only to Japanese players, while being designed as a Western RPG that lacks the Western MMO aspects that people would expect from such an open-world style game. This was manifesting itself in the gameplay and content loop in DDO as well, where Capcom was struggling to come up with new content in the form of new zones and monsters, while not monetizing the seasons themselves, resulting very likely in things eventually drying up. For reference, just look at how they ended up handling the Monster Hunter franchise, which is still very successful today. Season 3 would launch July 2017 and add yet more new lands, monsters, and more to take on. During this time, Western fans were petitioning Capcom to bring the title to the West, which would have certainly helped with their ability to make money and generate more content, but it should be said that not all markets are interested in globalization, and Japan was a classic one for that. The cracks for me started to show in April of 2018, because instead of a new season, we saw a mini-season of sorts. Sure, new content was still added, but 9 months later and not even a full season content release wasn't going to help the already drying up content problem. Capcom didn't just put a lot of effort into Dragon's Dogma Online either. Deep Down is basically vaporware at this point and was supposed to be Dragon's Dogma Online of the West. And there's a long list of failed online Capcom games, and even just Google Capcom and online and find plenty of hate circulating. What I'm trying to say is that Capcom's big foray into the online space had less than stellar results across the board, and it was likely not headed anywhere more positive. July 4th, 2019, a year and some change later, and Dragon's Dogma Online would be shut down with no new promises of it coming to the West. Capcom would exclaim that they had difficulty running the project. My guess is that they were also having difficulty monetizing the game, while also maintaining a sufficient content schedule, which is the classic difficulty in virtual worlds. Capcom's inexperience was a huge contributor, however, as their unwillingness to stick things through without a positive end goal in sight, because they were a bit more shrewd than others. To give them some credit, however, DDO might have had some success and still an entire region willing to play the game, but it was based on a game that was 7 years old at this point, and there was a new Dragon's Dogma on the horizon already. My guess is that the majority of the team was refocused to focus on that title instead. which might sound like a really negative way to end the timeline of things, and thus a part of the story of DDO, but I actually think that as long as DD2 actually does well, which it looks incredible and is releasing quite soon I should add, there is a high chance that they could go multiplayer again with another expansion. Remember, not only have they done that with Dragon's Dogma, they've also done it with Monster Hunter. Will they have learned from their previous attempts, or even if not, try to attract a Western audience for a Western-themed RPG? I think that there's a high chance of yes on both of those, but at the very least one of them. For Dragon's Dogma fans who didn't play DDO, or just those that are curious in general, what would be the point of doing another DDO? Versus just having a multiplayer portion of your game, and I guess that the argument is that DDO was more of a full commitment to such, and that it also offered different types of boss threats and different combat balancing. So although there were similarities to the first game, it was actually a unique game. But to be fair, it's probably less resource intensive to do it the way that Dark Souls is doing it instead of going fully online, while still maintaining the structure and world present in the single player portion of the game. Or of course they can just look at Capcom's Monster Hunter. If Capcom wants to do DDO in their same approach again, they're gonna have to build a game and content to match that. Dragon's Dogma 2 on the other hand continues to impress, and bringing with it classes that not even MMOs or MMORPGs are even confident pulling off, like the unique Trickster class, a non-combat class that serves as a debuffer and a taunter. Due to the design of Dragon's Dogma, it will always remain so attractive for MMORPG and MMO fans alike, especially with such a lack of ARPGs. Although DDO was killed merely 4 years after live and it never made it to the West, the good news is that it's nearly completely playable single-player or multiplayer with friends while setting up your own server. Check out the Discord link on screen or in the description for more information, or check out the GitHub information. DDO is nearly completely playable offline, allowing you to issue text commands to your pawns, customize them, and even customize how they fight. And if you want to play on a server with your friends, you can still do that as well. There's a couple video guides out there on how to get things set up, but joining the Discord is probably the best place to start. With the music playing, we have reached the end of the timeline and have gathered enough clues to put this case to rest. Why did Dragon's Dogma Online die, and why did it fail to come to the West? Well, it was Japanese market focused. The developers handling it had a lack of experience that they've largely fixed since then. A lack of content. It had unrefined and conflicted game design. Well, it never came to the West. And I'm conflicted with my final point because many signs do point to that being a significant negative and the reason that the game failed, and obviously abroad especially. Without a Western audience, you are lacking the majority of the kinds of players that would be interested in playing a Japanese-made Japanese online Western-style ARPG. It just feels too logical to ignore that point. Not to mention, more players and a larger audience would have likely resulted in more of them making money, of course. But I mentioned being conflicted because part of me wonders just how much of that really mattered. If Capcom already had a poor business model and content plan to go with it, meaning that things would have been kind of inevitable no matter the region in a sense, and second, having more money can increase your problems and sometimes not really make the money worth it in the end. I think it should be mentioned that if Capcom or any other non-Western company decided that if they didn't want to release their game to the West, and if they do, they're not going to cater to them, well then that's their decision as artists and thus business people. Especially if their personal views on what success is are going to differ from what ours are or others. But by the same token, online RPGs, no matter if they are Japanese, Korean, or Western, are popular globally, and the most popular in the West. It's just that Japanese or Korean titles, for example, can be successful without ever having to even appeal to Western fans or even launch in their respective markets, with Western players just playing more games and playing more of a variety of them. We do want regions to keep their cultural identity and uniqueness, don't forget that, and if being slow to release globally or at all globally is part of that process, I think it's worth it in the end, right? That being said, I still personally really want to see DDO or DDO 2 or a similar Japanese ARPG title launch in the West and actually launch for once on time, not 10 years later or never. Thanks for watching.
After it happened, I expected someone to do something. I expected parents to show up with questions and concerns. I thought the police would have done more, but nothing happened. Nothing changed.